Television has gone through a lot of changes over its life. It's an art form still in its early stages, and the way that technology and distribution has changed has a massive influence over the TV that we watch. What I want to talk about today is the kind of prestige TV that has dominated our discussion of television over the last 30 years. What is it? How did it come about? And is the era of prestige TV coming to a close? You're watching Hardly Matters TV, and this is Prestige TV. So you might still be wondering what Prestige TV is. But to talk about Prestige TV, I first have to talk about the concept of quality TV, which originated in the UK in the 1960s. The BBC has always had the aim to be educative as well as entertaining, and to this end they started to show programming that had a more realistic and socialist view of the country. They also began to introduce period dramas like Upstairs Downstairs, which aimed to be very realistic to the time period in which they were set. This is considered to be the origin of quality TV, as the concepts of realism and social themes would continue as TV evolved. I'm going to hop over to the other side of the pond now, as that is where we're going to be spending most of our time this video. You see, as the UK was breaking new ground in television, in the US, television was doing fine, but it was in need of a shake-up. All TV in the US was made to capture the widest possible audience, and also to please advertisers who preferred not to be associated with controversial themes that may alienate potential customers. As a result, almost all TV in the US was made using the method of least objectionable programming, meaning that they would keep shows very safe in order to not offend anyone and keep everybody happy. But as Lucasfilm learnt in 2019, trying to please everyone usually ends up pleasing no one.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
The introduction of Fox in 1986 challenged the big three networks of US television, which is ABC, NBC and CBS, with shows like The X-Files and The Simpsons and other shows that were designed to target more niche audiences. And it turns out that appealing to a particular audience actually helps in growing an audience. And Fox quickly became the fourth biggest network in the US. So this ushered in the era of American quality TV, which was characterised by more realistic and complex storylines. More realistic in terms of character, not like the aliens and stuff. None of Fox's individual shows would ever reach the top of the ratings, as they were targeting more niche and therefore smaller audiences, but the audiences were more consistent and more loyal to their favoured Fox shows. But this was still network television, so they were still beholden to advertisers and strict US censorship, and that's where HBO comes in. Technically, HBO had come in already, as they began life in 1972. It was the first of the modern premium cable TV channels, and offered sports programming as well as movies. Eventually they began offering self-produced TV content, and being a cable channel with no commercial breaks, they weren't beholden to advertisers or US censorship laws. In fact, the only people they were beholden to was the audience, as they were the ones paying the subscription fee. HBO saw that audiences were hungry for more complex stories, like the ones they were seeing on Fox, but they realised that they could take this even further. In fact, HBO could have naughty things like swearing and sex and violence. So that they did. The first of the series to really hit were Sex and the City, The Sopranos, and a show called Oz, which was a prison drama from 1997. These were also the first shows that we would refer to as prestige TV, which is characterised by ensemble casts, complex storylines which usually aim to involve some sort of cultural commentary, and what was at the time considered high budgets. So more of a development of the idea of quality TV rather than something entirely new. Other cable networks saw how successful HBO was with these shows, and followed suit, leading to a boom in prestige TV, designed to serve a niche audience uncompromised by pressure from advertisers. Since these channels appealed to audiences rather than advertisers, their popularity grew more and more through the noughties despite their premium price, bringing about what is sometimes called the second golden age of TV. The first golden age was in the 50s or something, and it's irrelevant to this video. Anyway, I'm going to talk about Netflix now. Good segue. You can tell I'm really getting the hang of this YouTube thing. In 2005, DVD rental company Netflix was designing a new product named the Netflix Box. The idea was that people could download movies to the box, making it a more convenient alternative to their already existing service where people would order the DVD and wait for it to arrive at their house. But after seeing the success of video streaming site YouTube, Netflix ditched the box in favour of a subscription streaming service. It's not that Netflix hadn't considered doing a streaming service, but before YouTube they were under the impression that people would reject the quality of streaming. But YouTube taught them that people don't really care about the quality, and so the first version of the Netflix that we know today was launched in January of 2007. The initial version only ran on the web and didn't have any original content, but it became popular very quickly thanks to its library of second release films and TV shows. By 2009, by which point they did have a TV and mobile app, the subscription service had surpassed the rental service. In 2011, with growing success but also growing competition from Hulu, Amazon Prime, and Apple's streaming rental service, which isn't to be confused with their streaming subscription service, Apple TV Plus, which was renamed to Apple TV but isn't to be confused with the Apple TV product. Yeah? Where was I? Netflix began their efforts in developing their own original content. The first show they released on the service was House of Cards with that guy. You know the guy.
And you trusted me, even though you knew you shouldn't. So we're not done, no matter what.
The show certainly had the feel of a traditional cable TV show, and it basically kind of was. Netflix didn't make the show themselves. House of Cards was produced by a different production company called MCR, and Netflix outbid many cable TV networks for the show. The one difference is that when Netflix released a show, they released it all at once, allowing the audience to watch the show at their own pace. People who watched Netflix had already become accustomed to this idea with their second-run shows, but this was the first time that a brand new show has been released like this. As more original shows were released like this, consumer habits changed, as people could and would binge the show as quickly as possible upon release. Netflix were happy to encourage this, which they did by adding autoplay and a skip intro button, which were designed to keep you in the flow of the show, basically stopping you from leaving the Netflix app. And the shows would change too. While serialized narratives were a staple of prestige TV already, they were now important to keeping people in that flow. When Netflix started making their own in-house productions, the break between episodes became less obvious. Although Netflix shows at the time did share a significant amount of their identity with cable's prestige dramas. After all, many of them were made by external production companies that serviced cable networks as well. But not HBO. HBO made all of their own stuff. And to be fair, they were still riding high in this period despite the shift to streaming. HBO's Game of Thrones was the most popular show in the world in the 2010s. I mean, I don't know that for a fact because it's hard to verify, but it was certainly very popular, despite following the prestige TV format, which, as discussed, usually results in more niche audiences. Anyway, the popularity of Game of Thrones exposes one of the major problems with the Netflix method. You see, it turns out that releasing a show week to week actually maybe has some benefits. One of the reasons for the great success of GOT is that everyone was talking about it. It's one of those water cooler shows, you know? You'd go into work on Monday morning and instead of doing any work, you'd just talk about what happened in the latest Game of Thrones episode. But you couldn't really do that with Stranger Things or Daredevil, because chances are everyone that you're talking to has watched a different amount of the show. Some binge the whole thing in one day, some watch one every couple of nights, and most people don't really care because they don't feel that they need to watch the show to be part of the conversation. Additionally, for streaming services, releasing one episode per week encourages people to stay subscribed for longer, instead of just being able to subscribe for 1 month or even getting a week free trial and just watching the whole show in one. Hulu clearly realised this difference as they generally favoured a weekly schedule, but to Netflix and also Amazon Prime, this just didn't really matter. As the only two major international streaming services, they were growing in popularity anyway. Their services were far more convenient than cable TV or network TV, they didn't have any adverts, and they had significantly more content than either of those, including some that was bought from them. And as a result, they still had excellent viewing numbers on their most popular shows. In 2019, Stranger Things reached nearly the same numbers as the final season of Game of Thrones. They also clearly didn't see that people were leaving the platforms in between their heavy hitters. So better to emphasise the ways in which they were more convenient than trying to be the same thing as what they replaced. But in November of 2019, things start to get a bit tricky for the big streamers. Both Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus were released that month, and both services attempted to set themselves apart from the likes of Netflix and Amazon Prime by creating their own prestige TV that had exceptionally high budgets and absolutely stacked casts, and in the case of Disney Plus were tied to already established franchises like Star Wars and Marvel. This is where streaming really began to set itself apart from the prestige TV of cable. In fact, it's questionable whether these shows even count as prestige TV at all, or whether some of them are more of an evolution into something entirely new. These platforms also did take the approach of weekly release schedules. HBO joined in 2020 with HBO Max, which also included a plethora of offerings from their parent company Warner Brothers. Although Netflix and Amazon had already been putting a lot of money into their original productions, they needed to up their game in the new market where TV production was becoming a lot more like movie production. I keep talking about Game of Thrones, but in 2019 it was reported that the final season of Game of Thrones was the most expensive TV production ever, with a budget of $90 million. Actually, that's not true. I was just looking at the wiki page for the most expensive TV productions while editing this video, and hidden among all the shows made in the last 5 years there was this, The Pacific from 2010, which I had never heard of, but it turns out it was a kind of spiritual successor to Band of Brothers from 2001. And like that show, it was produced by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks. That maybe goes some way to explain how they convinced HBO to approve triple the budget of the next most expensive TV show of that year. Anyway, this is clearly an outlier, as you can see by all the other shows around it on this list. But given that it did have a $217 million budget overall, it was decidedly more expensive than Game of Thrones, and nearly as expensive as WandaVision. Spoilers for the next sentence, where I talk about WandaVision. Just 2 years later, WandaVision was made with a budget of $225 million, despite being 2 hours shorter overall. Additionally, much of their potential second-run content had been taken to be used on studio-owned services, so they really needed to invest in their original content in order to keep up. But making TV like movies has its downsides. With the budget of each episode being so high on these shows, the seasons had to become shorter. Prestige TV was already known for having shorter seasons, generally 10 to 13 episodes, as opposed to the 20 to 24 of American network TV. But the budget of these new shows called for that to be knocked down to like 6 to 8 episodes per season, with shorter runtimes too. It's pretty rare to find a Prestige TV show nowadays that goes beyond that. And yet, despite the shorter runtimes, these are still some of the most expensive productions of all time, which just goes to show how unsustainable it would have been if they had been longer. The problem is that while seasons with longer runtimes have become unsustainable, the shorter seasons and runtimes are kind of unsustainable too. There's definitely a sentiment that recent offerings from the likes of Disney Plus have had severe pacing issues. I mean, some of these shows do only have a 4-hour runtime overall. This problem is exacerbated by the incredibly long breaks between seasons, a phenomenon that was easy to blame on COVID at first, but has continued beyond. It's now clear that it's actually just another symptom of those incredibly high budgets, which means that studios are rarely competent enough to greenlight more than one season of a show at a time. This, coupled with the fact that seasons generally take longer to produce nowadays because of the movie-like productions, means waits between seasons no shorter than 2 years and often up to 3. The problem is that sentiment towards a show can massively change in between seasons. Just ask Sam Levinson, the creator of Euphoria. Generally, enthusiasm for a show can't be maintained for such long breaks, even in less extreme circumstances. So what now then? Well, streaming services have made a bit of a shift in the last few years. The period between 2019 and 2022 was all about getting people on board with the new streamers, or in the case of the legacy streaming services, keeping people on board while there's all this new competition about. With these also being the pandemic years, the streaming services enjoyed a major increase in subscribers over this time. But as people returned to the outside world in 2022, subscriptions started to decline, and the streamers, having had to cancel or delay a lot of their projects, didn't have the same plethora of quality content to keep people interested as they did over the pandemic. So instead, it was time to shift strategy into how can we make this more profitable even though it's worse. The answer to this seemed to be to jack up the subscription prices, add commercial breaks, lay off a bunch of staff, and use AI as much as possible. You see, the focus is moving away from prestige dramas. Streaming services are instead producing more reality TV and documentary, as these are cheaper, have more mass appeal, and are better as second screen content. But the thing is, even their dramas have followed this trend, being cheaper, less niche, more friendly to advertisers, and more friendly for second screening. There are still shows that don't fall under this remit. Fallout comes to mind. I mean, streaming services do need at least one flagship show, let's be honest. But the more time advertisers spend on a platform, the more power they seem to get. Did you know that YouTube introduced advertising in 2007? And yet it was still a bit wild back then. But now, nearly 20 years later, it's really not, as I'm sure you're aware. So we're kind of looping back around to the least objectionable programming of network TV. The only difference is now that with so many international productions being made for or in conjunction with these American companies, that they may well be affected too. In the meantime, cable channels in the US have been dying out. This was inevitable in the streaming era, but was exacerbated by COVID. Most cable channels suffered a significant decline in viewership over the pandemic. Contrary to the massive bump in views that streaming services enjoyed, they also, just like everyone else, had to cancel their productions over this time. Unlike streaming services, after the pandemic and the Hollywood strikes that followed in 2023, most cable channels didn't recover. Now most cable channels that still exist are a shell of their former self, making significantly less original programming and generally just showing reruns of old shows from when they were the big dogs. So not a whole load of prestige TV coming from cable at the moment, apart from HBO, but all of that content is going to HBO Max too, and who knows what's going to happen to them in the near future. This, coupled with the streaming services shift in strategy, is why people generally consider the new golden age of TV to be over. In order to not end on too down a note, I will say that I don't think that prestige TV is gone and dead forever. We'll still get some new, unique shows every now and then, probably mostly from Apple TV at the moment, as they don't seem to be cost-cutting or adding ads anytime soon. But the likelihood is that it will take something new coming along to give us the next golden age of TV. Well, that's all. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.